Welcome back, adventurer, for another episode of Diablo Academy, your one-stop playlist for everything that you need to know to be able to make your very own character in Diablo 4 and push as far into all content as your heart could desire. I'm your host, MacroBioBoi, and in today's episode, we're actually going to be taking on a pretty big topic that I get asked about all of the time, and that is the Paragon board system. How do glyphs work? How do you make them bigger? How come my board doesn't look like your board? And how do you get the most bang for your buck? Literally, where do you put each point as you get them going node to node? Hopefully, by the end of this video, I'll have answered all of these questions and more, giving you the tools that you need and the knowledge to be able to do this on your very own, or to be able to make better sense of any build guides that you might be following, either from myself, other ones on Maxroll, or from your favorite creators. This video is going to be in multiple parts. I'm going to start off with the very basics, moving into more advanced knowledge and things that you should just know about and good practices, and then lastly talking about incredibly more advanced topics like the idea of re-gating efficiency by spending more points and other things that are not immediately intuitive in the system itself. If you feel like you already understand any topic in particular, please feel free to use the timestamps down below. But I do promise you at least want to make sure that you hear out the first few parts because things will build up on each other, and I don't want you to be confused jumping ahead when information was already shared earlier in the video. But let's go ahead and get into it, starting off with the basics of the Paragon board, what you need to know for being able to put your first few points in, and how to start making good decisions with your first point that will set you up for success later. The moment that you hit level 60, you unlock the Paragon system in Diablo 4. If you've already done a lot of your renown, you'll start off with additional points that you can already spend, typically being able to get all the way up to a glyph socket. For your class, your glyphs, your rare and magic nodes, and the benefits that they all confer will be different. Not only that, the main stats that you need to be aware of will also be different. For the Necromancer, we are an intelligence class, so intelligence will be our main core stat. Yours very well may be dexterity on the rogue, or willpower on the druid, or strength on the barbarian. The main stat is important because it will increase the damage that you do with all of your effects. This is one of the few damage buckets that you're able to add to via the Paragon board, and it's important to recognize it early on. To this very end, though, if you're afraid of wasting any of your points, or if you just haven't come to understand it is available as a resource, I would highly recommend coming over to maxroll.gg and utilize our character planner. Here you can plan out the entirety of your Paragon board as much as you want, with really important information as it relates to how many of each stat is available around the glyph socket in each one of your boards, with a really cool ability to be able to automatically path to any of the nodes that you're on merely by holding down the shift key. That'll be my first little tip. A lot of people don't know that you can do this, but by clicking this right here, it'll automatically spend all of those points and typically take the most efficient route, but not necessarily the most optimized route. So here on the Necromancer, I would actually want to be clicking this node as opposed to this node, but we'll cover why a little bit later on in this video. But make sure to use this resource if you haven't already. Every class can have a maximum of 5 Paragon boards. That means that you can use a total of 5 glyphs as well, and each board will have a glyph socketed near a node that is rare with stats on it, and as well as the magic nodes around it. The rare nodes will give you your core stat, while the other stat nodes around it for the Necromancer will grant you willpower and dexterity. These are not useless stats, they're actually very important for being able to activate bonuses, because every rare node will have a secondary bonus that you can get by reaching a certain breakpoint of stats. So here, I will gain 30 additive damage versus elite monsters, 10 intelligence, but if I were to get up to a total of 190 dexterity overall on my character, including stats from my gear, as well as incense and potions, I would actually gain an additional 30% damage. Getting this double bonus on a lot of these nodes is where you unlock a huge amount of power, so it's always important to make sure that you are aware of how many stats that you need. Not only that, but as you travel through more and more boards, these rare nodes will actually require more and more stats to be able to get them. So if these stats are incredibly important for your build, it may be better to put a board earlier on your character. And not only that, as your gear gets better, you'll be able to unlock more nodes more easily, with mythic items typically conferring a huge amount of all stats, getting you a huge amount of the things that you typically don't care about, to be able to max these out for you. One of the great reasons why Maxroll is such a good tool is because in the Maxroll planner, like I said previously, it'll tell you how many stats are around each glyph socket. And it turns out that each glyph socket is not made equal. But before we really understand that, we have to have a better understanding of what a glyph is. Your glyphs are leveled in the pit, and as your glyphs level, they'll continue to gain additional benefit. So the Essence glyph, as a really good critical strike damage glyph, will increase the amount of critical strike damage that you have for every 5 dexterity within its range. And starting at level 1, you only get 4 damage there, but if you were to meet all of the requirements, meaning getting up to 25 dexterity unlocked around the glyph within its range, you'll do an additional damage multiplier. And as you can see down at the bottom, as you level up the glyph all the way up to rank 46, you'll actually unlock an additional damage multiplier. The top bonus and the bottom bonus will continue to get stronger as you continue to level up your glyphs further and further and further. There are 2 break points that you need to be aware of. A base glyph, so a rank 1 glyph, will only have a radius of 3 nodes. So it'll go 1, 2, 3, and then generate a square from this point. At rank 15, the size of the glyph will actually increase, going up to 4 nodes. And then at rank 46, it will increase an additional and final time, going up to 5 nodes. On the max roll planner, any nodes that are relevant to that glyph will be highlighted in green. So you can see starting off at rank 1, there actually isn't even enough dexterity within range to be able to unlock the benefits of this glyph. You'll see a lot of the times in our build planners and our build guides, we'll have different stages of progression with different amounts of points that you need to be spending into them to be able to activate them. You'll also notice that as you increase the level of your glyphs here, the amount of stats within range will also automatically update in the planner. So at rank 1, you can see we only have 20 dex within range. At rank 15, we have 37. And then at rank 46, we have 59. But you may also notice that this board actually has an incredible amount of intelligence or willpower. This is why it's really important to understand that each board is not made equal. Certain boards are just better for certain glyphs, and it's only by coming to understand all of the pieces in this video where that will really be able to settle in and you'll be able to start making some really high-level decisions. But let's just go ahead and put in a rank 15 glyph essence here, and then we'll start to make some decisions about what we need to do in our starter board. Because again, just starting off here is going to set you up for success in ways that's kind of difficult to fully articulate. Even just from your first point, you want to start thinking about what you want to build towards. Now, I will just skip ahead a little bit and tell you that intelligence is always good to pick up, because intelligence will increase our damage with all of our effects, whereas things like willpower, although they do confer some bonus, are very low value. So typically pathing through intelligence, so going this way to a node, as opposed to going this way to a node, would be more valuable, where this dexterity and this willpower are very, very low value. But on most boards on the Necromancer, whenever you have multiple options, you're typically deciding between damage or survivability in some way. Typically, very early on, you don't need these resistance nodes, but as you're trying to bump up into higher torment tiers, where each torment tier reduces your resistances by 25% and your armor by 250, these nodes will become more valuable to you. But let's just say you don't necessarily need them right now. We're going to consider the other valuable things around these nodes. This node will give us damage and maximum life. That typically means that the magic nodes around it will give us damage and maximum life. Similarly, over here, this one gives us all resistance and maximum life. So there is all resistance available and maximum life. This isn't always the case, so it is really important to read these nodes and not just make that assumption. But with your starter board, you typically don't want to be filling out the entirety of it. You actually want to be getting through your board as fast as possible, because glyph sockets and legendary nodes are more often than not the most valuable and powerful things you can put onto your build. With things like more additive damage or more stats, bringing up a second tier of importance that is definitely good, but not necessarily going to make or break your build, where things like survivability being incredibly valuable early on, but often you will end up taking points out of them when you no longer need them. So starting off in our first board, typically making a decision that will bring you as efficiently to your glyph socket as possible, as well as either picking up intelligence along the way or stats that you'll need for that glyph socket is very important. This is why it's really good to plan ahead. So as an example, we can pick up the Scourge Rune here. Scourge Rune would be really good for a damage over time build for the Necromancer that's doing corrupting damage. And at a rank 1, you'll notice that we have enough intelligence to be able to activate it. Whenever it is an intelligence requirement, it will always be 40. Whenever it's either dex or willpower, it will always be 25. And we don't have any glyphs that require strength. But pathing towards this glyph, coming out of our first node right here, we're able to very easily pick up some intelligence, make a single point maneuver over, and then boom, we're able to put this in. So already we are at 10 intelligence. And the really good thing about intelligence glyphs is that the rare nodes will always be within range, and they each grant you 10 intelligence. They're basically like picking up 2 intelligence nodes for the price of 1, along with some additional benefits. So by spending another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7, 8, we have activated this node. The other great part about being able to activate nodes in directions is that it can start moving you towards things that you need. So let's say you really wanted this resistance here. It would actually be very inefficient because these 2 nodes are not going to further our progress along this way, and they're not intelligence, but by going this way, we're spending the same number of points, picking up an intelligence, and now all of a sudden we can pick up very valuable nodes. Maximum life is just straight up a multiplier of your life. So you're going to see a lot of build guides recommending this. And even though it's a small number, each individual one will add up very quickly. Again, like I said, pathing out of a board and going and unlocking more glyphs and more legendary nodes is often going to be the best call. There are certain circumstances where that's not necessarily the case. And you may also have, while you are gaining these Paragon points, have leveled up your glyph. A really important thing to recognize as you level up these glyphs is that sometimes nodes will become available that weren't previously, and this will make it so that you can actually pad through these boards more efficiently. It's not currently the case here, but keep that in mind. Whenever you rank up your glyphs, go back and look and make sure that you can't save a few points by maybe pathing a little bit differently. Walking out of the board as efficiently as possible, we're already dealing with a concept that I like to call gate efficiency. This is a gate. A gate is required for you to click on to be able to add another board. Again, you can have a total of 5 boards, meaning you can add a total of 4. Each gate will get you 5 of every single stat, so it's effectively like clicking an intelligence node, but better. And getting to that gate as effectively as possible is really, really important, not only for leaving a gate, but by entering a gate as well. Here, we've already built up to both this node and this node, so we have to look at the other nodes that are available. On one, we'll gain damage to elites, on one, we'll gain plain damage. Now, if you are aware of like the end game of this game, damage to elites is typically a lot more important than just plain damage because we want to kill bosses and elites faster, and we actually don't want to kill trash mobs faster. So this node, one that I will always want to pick up, I will consider free. We have to build this node, and it is a valuable node for us. The other nodes, though, are not particularly valuable. On one side, we have strength, willpower, and willpower. On this side, we have dexterity, intelligence, and willpower. So I will call this gate exit a 2-node exit because intelligence is effectively free. We'll talk more about that later. But this would cost me 3 points I don't want to spend. This costs me 2 points I don't want to spend. So this one is more efficient, and we'll keep using that as we look at future boards. Now, in the game, this will look a little bit differently, but on the Max Roll Planner, it shows you each one of these boards, and it also has a way of showing how many stats are in range for its glyph socket. You can similarly change this to either 3 nodes, which would be a rank 1, 4 nodes, which would be rank 15, or 5 nodes, which would be rank 46. This is a damage over time build, so we're going to use Wither, the damage over time board for the Necromancer. And this is where you're going to learn the second basic but incredibly important little tidbit. You can rotate your boards in-game before you attach them. In Max Roll, it's right up here, but in-game, the reason why your board might look different than my board is because these boards rotate. And rotating your board is actually very, very important because how you move towards a glyph socket or you move towards a legendary node is going to be just as important as exiting a board. We now need to enter a board, and keeping that in mind is going to make your gameplay experience and your efficiency that much higher than other people who are not being aware of this. For the Wither board, we have a lot of options. The Wither board is really good for intelligence, so we may want to use a glyph in this board that increases with additional damage based off of how much intelligence we have within range. But in addition to that, the Necromancer has a lot of really interesting glyphs, like Abyssal Glyph, which increases your rare socket bonuses. And we also have options like Amplify, which increase your magic nodes within range. So something like Abyssal will take this rare node that gives me damage to shadow damage targets and intelligence and add a multiplier to it, which can often net you even more intelligence or additive damage than even just putting down a glyph that gains additive damage based off of how much of a stat is within range. So we're going to be doing things like this very often when we're considering glyph efficiency. But when you look at something like this, like if we're using Abyssal, or if I would typically use something like Sacrificial here, where the intelligence is, the ones that I will need to click to activate this, will help to inform where I'm going to leave this board and where I'm going to enter the board from. Because you'll see that to be able to get up to this glyph, if I wanted to put the board like this, I'm going to have to click a lot of nodes that aren't particularly valuable to me. So these are bad nodes. This would be a 1, 2, 3, 4. This would be a 4 node entrance. And from other directions, it might not be as valuable either. So 1, 2 with the 2 intelligence being free, and then 3 on willpower. It's a 3 node entrance. And then in addition to that, we need to consider that we want to get all the way up to the wither node up here. And since we have to track up through there, it turns out that the most efficient way to put this board is actually by spinning it twice and entering it from here. You'll see that there are typically very good nodes around this area, so a lot of damage reduction, which we want. We want our legendary node, and then things like a huge amount of maximum life for survivability is typically very good. Similarly, there's a very good rare node that we would have to pad through on our way to the glyph here that gives us more shadow damage over time and resource cost reduction, so using our skills is easier. Whereas something like this gloom node increasing our shadow resistance, although potentially valuable in the early game, doesn't really solve a purpose for us, especially in the end game. So we'd like to avoid it if we can. What that basically means is that by pathing down to here, going through as much intelligence as possible, and making sure to pick up all these valuable nodes, will actually end up being better for us, because these are not dead nodes. We have to click this one to get to here. Then we have a lot of intelligence getting to more valuable nodes here as we pick up all of these. And then this is a single node to get down to intelligence, which is always good. And then we start picking up intelligence within range. Now, this is one of the more interesting places where our glyph is in a very, very weird shape. And I want to just show you what your glyph might look like, be able to activate it. Because right here, you might think, well, I'll just click this intelligence and I'll click right here. But now I also have to click all the way over here as well. And typically, whenever you're doubling up on nodes, it's not particularly good or not particularly efficient. While this is the same amount here, one, this just looks cooler, but also two, you're going to see that this same pattern can be found elsewhere, where even though it looks like we're being a little bit inefficient, we have fully activated this glyph. And since it doesn't gain any more from having more intelligence within range, we actually don't care about anything else within this range. We have fully satisfied this glyph. And now we just need to look at what's our most efficient exit out of this board. Here, if we count the intelligence again, you'll notice that we have 1, 2, 3 nodes we don't care about. So this is a 3 node exit. Similarly, 1, 2, 3 nodes over here. This is similarly a 3 node exit since all the intelligence is free. But very interestingly enough, this node right here, strength, is a little bit more important than the other unimportant stats, because strength will naturally grant you armor. And since getting armor and resistances is one of the most important things that your Paragon board does for you, even though strength isn't intelligence, it won't increase our damage, it is more valuable than the other ones. So looking over here, you'll notice that I have willpower, and dex. These do nothing for a dot build, but at least this strength does do something. So all of a sudden, even though this is the same number of nodes, it is the same 3-point exit, it is slightly more valuable. It's more like a 2.75 exit. And here we are done with this board. You may think, well, it's an entire board. Why am I not pathing out to everything? Why am I not filling everything? You just don't have to. But one of the things I said earlier on is that often just pathing to a legendary node and getting to your glyph and getting out is often a lot more valuable. And this is where you might want to be making decisions, because even though we're only on our second board, we've already spent 88 points. And technically speaking, we didn't have to spend this many points to be able to get our first 2 objectives. So technically speaking, we didn't even have to pick up this node here. And what that means is that even though this has a lot of intelligence in it, we could actually save a ton of points by very quickly pathing this way. And when we eventually want to pick up this maximum life node, pathing down this way will become more efficient. But at least for right now, this one is significantly more efficient as far as points spent are concerned. And then similarly, you don't have to pick up every single magic node along the way, or necessarily even every single rare node, although they will typically be very valuable for you. So very often you'll see that you won't necessarily pick up every single magic node. And instead, we're now down to 79 points and we've accomplished this same goal. We're going to look at the frailty board just as a last example about this initial concept of pathing early on, hitting objectives and making sure to pick up things that you need and trying to focus on that as a really, really good standby strategy here. But Frailty is an interesting board where early on, how you pad through it, and later on how you pad through it will sometimes require you to fully flip a board in its entirety, and that's why you will often see our build guides actually swap the orientation of boards as you hit certain progression points in your gear. So just as an example on this same build, this is the initial setup that I have for the boards in order. This is with rank 15 glyphs, and you'll notice that to get all the way over to these minimum requirements where every single glyph is activated and every single legendary node is activated, we have only spent a total of 234 points. This would be just around hitting like Paragon level 210. So this is where you would expect to be at that point. Once you hit rank 46 glyphs, funnily enough, we've actually spent less points because we need less to be able to activate these glyphs now that they are larger. They are picking up more stats more naturally. But at the mythic respec point, where all of a sudden we have access to our endgame gear, giving us a lot more stats than we typically would normally have, you'll see that these boards flip, and where we are spending our points will also flip. So between these two, you notice that blood begets blood. We actually didn't pick up a ton inside of this board at first, but once you're on your mythic gear, we think that you've progressed to a certain point. We will be picking up more of these. We'll be pathing through things differently. And the frailty board all of a sudden becomes a lot more efficient to go from one side as opposed to the other side. So let's go ahead and look at that on our previous example, just get a better understanding of it. Frailty has very efficient entrance and exit paths that are available depending on your point in progression. You'll notice here that if we're trying to build down to relevant stats and the importance around the glyph socket, we have 1, 2, and technically speaking, 3 dead stats, but we have a ton of intelligence that we pick up along the way. That is great, but it is a lot of points to just start getting into this area, and starting off early, you don't have that many points. Not only that, you need to get to pretty different parts of the board. You'll notice that pathing over to the legendary node and pathing up to the glyph wants you to efficiently go around 2 different parts of this same node cluster here. So starting on very early, you may see a lot of builds where even though there is not a lot of very efficient stats here, so this is a 4-point entrance, we're already able to pick up a very, very big node here, huge amounts of attack speed and maximum life. And then we're also able to efficiently now go up to a very powerful stat here, as opposed to all of these willpower nodes. I can basically skip this one. Not only that, I can now build over, and then by picking up a lot of stats right here, just a single point of dexterity to get these free intelligence nodes, I can already go ahead and start putting in my glyph socket. We'll drop this back down to glyph socket 15 at this point as an example. This board has 65 intelligence within range. I've already picked up 25 of them, so I actually only need to pick up 3 more intelligence nodes to be able to unlock this fully if I wanted to. And in addition to that, I can start pathing down to my legendary node right here. Now, as far as the efficiency from a most recent point, this wants us to do a 3-node pickup here, which is this dexterity, dexterity, and willpower. But I can pick up a valuable node here, meaning a non-dead stat, a single willpower, and then basically move only through intelligence. So 1, 2, 3 versus the 1, 2, 3. It will cost me 1 more or 2 more. These stats might be required for you. They may not. Similarly, you could have instead gone this way, which instead of picking up this dexterity, you pick up this intelligence and then work your way over to here. And then you'll notice I only need 2 more nodes. So we could build up this way, be able to pick up this, where even though we're getting more intelligence than we need, we get more bonus for each intelligence that we're putting in. This is also just a very powerful node. And at this point, I have picked up the legendary node, I've activated a glyph, and I've pathed through a very powerful rare node. Because on the endgame version of this same build, there is very valuable nodes over here with shadow damage over time. This is actually one of those examples where this gives shadow damage over time, which is called corrupting damage, and resource cost reduction. But the magic nodes around it give it shadow damage and shadow damage over time. So no more resource cost reduction at all. But you can see that by spending the 1, 2, 3 points that we need, which are not intelligence here, we can pick up an important rare node cluster, and then also pad through a huge amount of intelligence to pad through here. Since we want to be picking up this maximum life on an endgame build, just be able to get maximum survivability. This is a required pathing point. This also makes it very efficient to pick up the legendary node, and then with more intelligence expenditure, get over to huge amounts of resistances and armor. In addition to that though, because we have pathed to this node instead, we have a very efficient pathing through here for a different glyph, which actually wants to use dexterity. This dexterity is easy to pick up with the magic nodes here. Path through here. You'll see that we're spending a lot of intelligence just pathing efficiently enough to be able to pick up these nodes here. And in fact, I think that this is actually even more efficient, so I'm going to recommend that in the future. But here we have the minimum requirement to be able to hit this dexterity bonus. And since we're already here, it's only an expenditure of a single additional point to get over to the other very important node. So this is a place where if you know that one of your boards is going to be very efficient early game, but inefficient late game, that might be something that you want to put at the end of all of your boards, even if the legendary node might be very easy for you to activate, because you don't want to have to respec all of this and you don't want to go point by point by point. So putting it at the end minimizes the amount of time that you have to spend later respecking a single board, as opposed to tucking this away early on and having to redo all of your boards later. I'm going to go ahead and call that the end of the initial part of this video, where those are what I consider to be the basics that you need to be considering, and the literal how does it function, and then also really good early game decisions to be making about why each individual thing goes into anywhere else. For these next parts, we're going to start talking about the value of nodes and when you have to start making hard decisions. Now, where do you start building to? Typically speaking, survivability is always good, but if you've already maxed out your survivability, if you already have max armor and max res, should you be picking up more survivability stats? Do you actually need as many as that? Or should we start moving towards some more damage? Not only that, how do you even determine whether or not the damage is good for you? Well, in general, additive damage is very, very good early on. So the choice here of 15 damage to elites or even 10 damage right here. 10 damage right here early on is typically very good. You haven't masterworked your gear yet. You may not be able to afford to temper on additive damage onto your gear. So if you're looking at your character, on a starter version of the gear, you might have some additive damage on your tempers, but maybe you needed more ultimate cooldown reduction, or maybe you needed more attack speed, or maybe you needed more crit chance to be able to hit different thresholds, right? Maybe you can't afford to optimize and put damage in every single slot. How do you decide whether or not the intelligence node here is worth more damage or this additive damage node? I am going to explain the math of this. This is why, if you've ever interacted with me online outside of stream, you've heard me say something along the lines of, there is no one right answer. You have to do the math. And I'm very sorry, but we're going to do some math really quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and set all of that up just very, very, very quickly so that it's a bit automated and it's a little bit easier to see. Intelligence as a stat grants you 1% increased damage for every 8 intelligence that you have. So the equation for this is actually fairly simple. So 2,198 divided by 8 gets you 274.8. This will increase your damage as a multiplier. I know it says plus, ignore that, it is a multiplier. And when you're figuring out what a multiplier is, to figure out what percentage it increases it by, you divide the multiplier by 100 and you add a 1 to it. This is a lot easier to understand on something like an aspect with a smaller number. Great Feast currently increases your damage by 45%. This is a 1 plus 45 divided by 100, or a 1.45 multiplier. It nearly increases your damage by half. So to get this number inside of that same equation, it is 1 plus your total intelligence divided by 800, which is dividing it by 8 and dividing it by 100. You can put those two numbers together. So if we take the amount of intelligence that we have, which is 2,198, and we do that calculation, it is increasing our damage by 3.74. Now, how much does the next 5 intelligence increase your damage by? Well, the difference between 2,198 and 2,203 is a difference of a 3.753 multiplier versus a 3.74. And the increase in damage there is 0.167%. Now, if I were to put this out a few more decimal points, you'll see these numbers are like a bit more interesting, right? There's a little bit more going on under the hood. But at 3 sig figs, or at significant figures here, 3 numbers after the decimal, you'll see that every 5 intelligence will be increasing your damage by about 0.167 damage, until we start seeing a little bit of the diminishing returns. Increasing any singular bucket of damage has diminishing returns. If you were to double your damage, that's a 100% increase in damage. If you wanted to double your damage again, you can't just add another 100%, you would have to add 200%. To go from 2 times damage to 4 times damage, you have to double how much you added in. If you had your 100% of damage, increased it by 100% to double it, and then added another 100%, you only would have tripled it. That is what a diminishing return is, and it is across anything where you're adding more and more and more into a singular bucket. Now, to calculate the relative value of any additive damage that we want, the very simple example is basically any additive damage node in the Paragon is worth roughly 10 additive damage. Now, this is not true once you start to get really deep into theory crafting, like how valuable is damage versus a healthy enemy? Well, it's only worth 20% of its value unless you're one-shotting the enemy. How much is damage versus an injured enemy? Well, it's only worth 35% of its total value. How much is your crit damage worth if you're not at 100% crit chance? I talk about a lot of this in my Critical Strike Damage Diablo Academy, so I would highly recommend going and watching that. It's in this same playlist. But for this character, we have a total of 1200 additive damage. And I just want to show you how to figure that out yourself because there's a lot of misinformation out there. On this character, we're getting additive damage from a lot of different sources. We have some on our tempers here. We'll also have some on our weapon as a basis, like the implicit stat for damage over time. And we may also put some onto our gloves, etc. Not only that, though, we are also getting a lot from our Paragon, right? We have traveled through nodes that give us additive damage. We have glyphs that are giving us additive damage, so on and so forth. But when you're looking at your character stat sheet will tend to lie to you. For this damage over time build, we can neither crit, so we don't care about this, nor can we overpower. The first damage additive that we have is vulnerable. And you may notice that the big number at top is 173. The issue is that in-game, your actual additive damage is multiplied by any multipliers that you have. So vulnerable does 20% multiplicative damage. My true additive is the one down at the bottom. You have 52.5 of this stat from items. And when you're looking at your additive damage, you have to look at that stat, not the one at top. That one's just lying. You can ignore that completely. And you can look at this bottom number. So by going through and adding up all of the ones that actually apply to me, so I do vulnerable damage, I do all damage, I'm doing damage with shadow, I'm not doing damage with bleeding, so that doesn't matter for me. I am doing corrupting damage, I am doing damage to elite monsters, which I rate at 100% of its value. Crowd control, I rate this at 1/3 of its value. Damage with corrupting, I have a little bit of that in my Paragon, and then damage while healthy. I like to assume that'll always be healthy, so I put this at 100% value. When you take all those numbers together, I have 1212 additive damage. The math to figure out what this multiplier is you take your number, you divide it by 100, and you add 1. So 1200 additive damage is a 13 times multiplier. Adding 10 more additive damage on is increasing my damage by 0.75%. So right here, already we can kind of stop doing the math, at least for right now. There is almost no place where adding 10 additive damage would ever be outperformed by adding 5 intelligence. So at first, if we were looking at this same character, we would want to start making sure that all of the decisions that we're making are picking up additive damage, because the difference in 0.75% and 0.16% is pretty massive. Like if I were to actually show you a bunch of the hidden stats that I have here, actually, you'll notice that the intelligence increase that we're getting continues to get smaller and smaller, just like our additive. But this number here is not really going to overlap with this number here for a very long time. At this point on the same build, we've already added over 100 intelligence. That's 20 Paragon nodes. Versus over here, the same 20 Paragon nodes, we have added on a whopping 230 additive damage, and it's still vastly overperforming. So in this build, at this point, when we have everything activated, I want to start making sure to prioritize, if I'm just looking for damage, every node that gives additive damage. But this is why I say you always have to do the math, and understanding how to do this math is very important. And just as a quick example, because I didn't really touch on this in that last part, there's also the universe where this calculation changes the further along in your progression that you are. So this additive damage value is actually when I'm on my mythic gear and I have all of my glyphs fully leveled. You'll notice that I have basically double the additive damage of my ancestral setup on this build. But even there, each additional 10 additive damage that I'm gaining is increasing my damage by 0.417%, which is still stronger than the intelligence. Should you always pick up intelligence? Basically, yes. Should you always path through intelligence whenever you can? Basically, yes. But especially earlier on, when you have less additive damage and being able to pick up intelligence has been a major priority, getting these big additive damage slots will often outperform it. And if you read row 8 here in my notes when I was creating this video, I was just coming up with a little bit of a rubric. That's basically what I said. At first, additive damage is much more important. Then at some point, intelligence becomes a lot more important, and then additive damage becomes more important again. So basically, it's at your progression point, this math changes, and understanding how to do that math will empower you to make the best decisions you can. And a very similar concept to this idea of as your character progresses, what you do and do not want changes, also applies to your defensive stats. This is my starter Necromancer. You notice we have no uniques, we have no, like ancestral gear, we don't have any mythics on it, right? And we're currently in Torment 1. In Torment 1, I currently have as much armor as I need. I only need 1,000 armor, and all of my resistances are capped. The cool part about in-game as well as a max roll planner is it will show you how much overcap you are as well, just in case it would be a little bit easier for you. But the moment that I get into Torment 2, you'll notice that I'm no longer armor capped, but I am still resistance capped. What that basically means is that if I've spent a lot of points picking up resistances, maybe I don't need all of them, and just swapping out that point very quickly, double checking your stats to make sure that you're still above cap, means that you could actually regain these stats. And by taking out these points that you put in earlier on, or perhaps even repathing so that you're not picking up any of these, and instead all of a sudden we're over here with more intelligence, which naturally gets your resistances in the first place, really important thing to remember, as well as more damage. And this character is still at resistance cap, even though I've bumped up my torment level. And all of a sudden I have regained 1, 2, 3. I've regained 3 points that I can now spend into damage. I can pick them up here, etc. These are constantly in flux, and where you need to put your points to be able to get these stats for you is also constantly in flux. So make sure that your gear is constantly in conversation with your Paragon. At different points, you may need more or less, meaning you have to pull out some damage to go pick them up just for now, or vice versa, pull them out of those defensive stats and drop them in. There's even points where nodes like this, which seem incredibly valuable over here on Frailty board, like a huge amount of resistances, a huge amount of armor, just aren't required for you to hit these caps anymore. So you could say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Technically only 7 because all these intelligence are free. But that's 7 points you don't need to spend if your gear doesn't require it. And remembering that your intelligence gets you all resistance and your strength gets you armor is a really good way to make as much value out of every node that you pick up as possible. And you will often be able to save Paragon points even while spending Paragon points elsewhere. So that brings us to the end of the second and also kind of the third act. I realize that I've put these two things together. But now what you have are the basics about literally how it all functions, 2, the importance of everything, 3, how to do the math, and 4, why any one individual movement through the board can be incredibly consequential and how to make those types of decisions. The last things that we really have to talk about is actually in comparing glyphs. And this video has gone on for too long. So I'm actually going to make this a part 2 video. So thank you very much for watching this part. I'll also link to that part 2 immediately because I'm going to have to cut out like half of this. This was ridiculous. But you want to go over to there because there is a lot of nuance and what glyphs work for your build and why is a very, very deep science that has a lot to do with all this efficiency we already talked about, but also gaining a better fundamental understanding of the relationship between multipliers and additive. If you appreciated this video, make sure to check out the other videos in the Diablo Academy. I promise you the rest of them are not nearly this long, but Paragon is just insanely complex. And if I didn't explain all of this, I feel like I would have been doing a disservice to you. But if you did appreciate it, subscribe to the channel. If you want to see more of this, leave a like on it and leave a comment down below for what kind of topics you're hoping to see in this Diablo Academy series, because the more that you all inform me about what you need education on, the better I can fine tune that education to make sure that you're getting all the information that you need. Thank you very, very much for watching this video. I truly, truly hope that it helps. And I look forward to seeing you in our next class of Diablo Academy.